Welcome to Recross the Paths, where we celebrate the Cube community one conversation at a time. My name is Cade. Today I am here with my friend Gabor. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Thank you, Cade, for chatting with me. I always love to talk Cube.
I did want to start by putting you on the spot a little bit. We first met at CubeCon, was that 2 years ago now or 3 years ago?
2024, yeah.
Yeah. So you were one of the first people who came up to me after I'd started the show and mentioned the show. I remember you basically called me out of the crowd to say that you had picked up a project that we're going to talk about in a second and asked me if I'd be willing to sit down and play it with you. And of course, I immediately dropped all of my plans to sit down and do that. So that was really special for you to include me in what you were doing. And that was just a really amazing connection for me. So thank you for that. And I'm so excited that we've gotten to continue connecting from there.
Yeah, I mean, it was like not the first Cube event I had gone to, but the first one with more people than just like New York folks and like the East Coast crew. So Recross the Paths was super new at that time. And I had listened to however many episodes were out. And then it had, inspired this project. So I was like, well, Kate, you got to come see it. So yeah.
Yeah, there's something so heartwarming about like, I made this thing because of another thing that you did. And it's like, how cool to see the threads connect like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you've done, I'm kind of dancing around it a little bit, of course. I'm talking about a particular Five Alive that you worked on, but you've also done a number of other projects, including the Etherium Landscape, which we'll dive into a little bit as well. But Gabor, why Cube? Why is that something that you're engaged with?
I could give a really long answer, but the short answer is that I think all of my gaming, my entire life, and I've always been a person who played a lot of games, was really just leading me to playing Cube in this era where Cube is like a design project on top of like a gameplay experience and a community. Cube means like a lot of different things to me, I guess, and like led to a lot of different kinds of connections, which I'm deeply appreciative of. The slightly longer answer is that I played Magic in middle school, which was learning off of my friend's bulk from Scars of Mirrodin and New Phyrexia and Zendikar, probably drafting for the first time in Innistrad, and then playing Standard through RTR, showing up one day, finding out that half of my Standard deck had rotated, and my friends had just learned about this very cool new game called League of Legends, and then the Magic was gone from my life for a very long time after that. And, we were coming out of the pandemic. It's 2023. I'm on a Substack for D&D because, I played many different games under the sun, or have played many different games under the sun since early 2010s. And in this Substack, it was like a world building, under the like world building section. It's like, you have to go watch this New Phyrexia video by this YouTuber called Ristic Studies, who I had never heard of. Amazing. I knew Phyrexia, of course. That was the bulk I learned the game on. Elish Norn and Surgical Extraction are both like illustrations that were permanently imprinted on my mind ever since I was 13. I watched the video. I loved it. I was like, wow, I really should give this game another shot. I played Commander for like 2 months, and then I was like, this is not what I want to do. I want to play 1v1. I want to draft. I remember drafting was super awesome, and then Cube came soon after.
That's pretty amazing that you had your starting experiences in kind of like the halcyon days of mid-era Magic. Like, you're talking about the Scars of Mirrodin era. You got to do, like, you mentioned the Innistrad draft, which some people still consider to be like the best individual limited set in Standard.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so many people have like nostalgia for Old Border, and I was just at Vertex Philly and I was talking with a friend on the car ride home. It's like, yeah, neither of us have any like desire to play with cards so bad that that they're like, that I feel embarrassed about them in my deck. Like, I know that people love those kinds of cubes, but when I have no nostalgia for them, they really don't hit the same for me. I do like low power Magic, but I don't love like, I don't get excited about Crawworm the way that some people do, I guess.
I mean, it's tough to get excited about Crawworm. I mean, like, I play old school, and it's sometimes tough to get excited about Crawworm.
Well, some people in Philly were excited about Crawworm over the weekend, so Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't know how good I had it, casting Sphinx's Revelation in Standard and playing Innistrad Limited before playing like 20,000 hours of League of Legends. It was like, man, I really had it right back when I was 13.
Well, you mentioned this game and others being a road into community for you as well. Like you mentioned kind of being in a D&D forum. Like so much of that is about building community too, right?
Definitely. I'm a big fan of Shut Up and Sit Down, which is a YouTube channel about board games. And then Quinn's Quest, which is one of the founders of that, like went on and started doing role-playing games. And he said a really interesting thing recently that I've been mulling over a lot ever since he said it in this video, which was like, I think, or maybe it was in an interview. It's like, I think that my entire career, because he was like a video games journalist and then a board game journalist and then a tabletop role-playing game person now, he's like, my entire career was directing me towards becoming a tabletop role-playing game player, because every time I looked at what I was doing, I realized that I actually wanted to be closer to people. I went from video games to board games to role-playing games, and it's just like a linear line in like how much you interact with people and get to talk to them and see their faces and sit at a table with them and enjoy their company. That's not too dissimilar to what I experienced playing so many video games, thousands and thousands of hours of online multiplayer games, just to realize that actually what I wanted to do was sit at a table with people I liked and not look at a screen. And
you mean you weren't just stoked about collecting rat tails for villagers?
Yes. CSGO, League of Legends, these were all like ways that I stayed in touch with people through the pandemic, and I appreciate that it did those things for me at that time, but I'm so glad to be leaving that behind. Like 2025 was really like the first year where I like fully quit all video games, and I'm so much happier for it. Yeah. I'm very extroverted in that I really can have plans every night of the week with people, not always Magic, not always games, but if I was in a situation where I was like in a group of people that, or like in a social group where I could play like board games, card games, or Magic every night, 7 days a week, I would do it. So, yeah, maybe it's good that I don't do that, but I do feel that way. It's always like, I'm down if you're down.
Yeah. Well, in different seasons of life for sure, right?
Exactly.
There's sometimes that like absence makes the heart grow fonder, where it's like, if I don't get to do it as frequently, it makes me appreciate the times I get to do it. But,
right.
If you could swing a couple nights a week of playing games, like that's pretty compelling.
Yeah.
So with Cube, you found your way into playing it as a kind of the natural progression of things you enjoyed. How did you get into building cubes?
Yeah, so I think to say more about like how I got into Cube, it was like I was playing Commander, I was watching Tolarian Community College and Ristic Studies and a lot of the like big Magic YouTubers, and I don't think they had just posted like a Cube video, but I somewhere buried deep from 2013, I was like, yeah, there's like this format where you get to draft, but you don't have to like continually acquire new cards over and over again. And so I like looked up Cube, and then I just watched some TCC video about Cube, and at the end he shouts out Ryan Over Turf's 180 card cubes, or two birds, whatever you want to call them. And I was like, that's perfect, because at the same time my partner was open to learning about Magic because they enjoyed the Ristic Study video so much. So they had like learned, we were just playing 1v1 Commander, which was not very good gameplay wise, unsurprisingly. And then I put together a 180 card cube. I just like cloned a list, and then we started doing that, and then found some other people who I knew in my life and didn't even know that they knew how to play Magic. And I was like, oh, you actually do know how to play Magic? Like, let's put a draft together sometime. And it was just so like natural. I mean, I've been hosting board game nights since I was in middle school. Like drafts would happen at my house, or board game like Risk Legacy or Pandemic or whatever. Like back then I was always the host, so it was very easy for me to be like, okay, like let's just have 4 people come over to draft, a 180 card cube. And so I was just cloning cubes for a really long time, to be honest, and tweaking them very little. And then the first cube that I really think I built was Necropolis, which is a different desert cube than Etherium Landscape. And it was because of Vertex Philly last year, so pretty much exactly a year ago. In a single day, I drafted Bones' Ancient Desert, Lincoln's Penrose Cube, and Parker's Pulp Nouveau Cube. And
Wow. What an all-star list.
Yeah, all-star list. If you put those 3 cubes together, it's not too far from what Necropolis is. It's a full desert that is skewed towards black, plays out of the graveyard, but is also a bar cube. The big appeal for me is that it's like I bring it and there's nothing else. There's one box, there's no tokens, no counters, no basic land station. So you draft everything you play with. When you're done with the draft, you pick up your full pool and you give it back to me, and then you're done. And then, yeah, I think that really like unleashed the gates. I guess I had designed some 5 Alives before that, but that was the first like full 8-player cube that I ever designed.
You mentioned something like CubeCon being one of the larger events that you've gone to. Is this kind of your first exposure to the outside world, as it were?
I guess so. I was cubing regularly with people that I was organizing tabletop workers to unionize in New York City before the first Cube for a Cause, which preceded CubeCon by like 3 months or something like that. It was like August 2024, I think. So I was cubing with them. They were like, hey, there's this cube event happening in New York, like we should go. And I said, that sounds awesome. You know, I've been trying to cube twice a week since I learned that like there were, as soon as we had like 8 people to start drafting. And then, yeah, we went to Cube for a Cause. It went quite well for me. You know, I just had so much fun. I also top 8'd. It was just like a huge blast. And then, yeah, like went to CubeCon just a couple of months later. I mean, yeah, CubeCon was like my first exposure to like meeting people outside of New York, or exactly the specific people that came to New York for Cube for a Cause that first time. And then, yeah, I quit my job in between that Cube for a Cause and CubeCon. And then I was really like on the East Coast Cube circuit the first half of 2025. I went to Vertex, Baltimore, Cube for a Cause in New York again. The only one that I didn't go to was BCP, but then I also went to Saltbox. So I went to like 4 events in the first 5 months of 2025, and I think I became a familiar face. Yeah.
Jumping right in.
Yeah, definitely.
BCP is a Boston Cube Party, just in case.
That's right.
So in your current spot with Cube, having done it now for a time, do you still clone lists and work from there, or is a lot of your discovery on the building side?
It's much more on the building side now. I mean, I still will clone a cube. I cloned Compost after drafting it in DC. I talked about that on Lucky Paper because I was crashing with Anthony that weekend. I mean, the cube was just so fun, and it's based in a city that I am not in, and it has a lot of overlap with another cube I already had. So I was like, okay, I'll put together the list and then start like being able to draft it more often. I think that those cubes that are like that level of complexity are ones that really reward like repeat drafts, and I really wanted to be able to do that. So I will still clone a cube, but I spend a lot more time thinking about cube in a design way rather than in like, oh wow, which cube do I want to clone now? And I also will say that like multiple people have pointed this out, but New York is very odd in multiple ways in the cube scene. I think we have a lot of different play groups. There's not a single cohesive scene the way there is in like the other big cube cities. I know that like many places there's only sort of one group, and of course like New York is super privileged to have like so many cubers, but compared to Philly or Baltimore where like they'll fire 4 pods like every week, 3-4 pods every week, New York will fire 3 or 4 pods but distributed over like 3 or 4 groups. So different groups have like very different ways of approaching the game. They have very different levels of commitment and engagement. And there is one group where most of the people are quite new to Magic, and their only way of engaging with Cube is just tell me what cube to clone, I'll clone it, and this is what we'll draft for the next like 4 months. And so I'm very lucky in that now I'm the most enfranchised cuber in that group, and I just get to ask for what I really am excited to draft. Of course, you know, I like present like things, and the person who's hosting like makes the final decision, but I'm just like presenting like a, you know, murderer's row of like the best cubes I've ever drafted. I'm like, I would love to have any of these exist in New York. Like, let's please like draft any of these. And then he picks his favorite, and then we get to draft it. So like I drafted Midwinter before ever having drafted a cube of Jake, the designer's, like with his cards. Like I drafted Midwinter before drafting his copy of Midwinter or Bodleian, which he's probably best known for, which I think is just a really funny experience.
That's really amazing. Actually, a funny experience to that end at CubeCon a year before last. A group of us were doing an after-hours draft in the lobby, and somebody came up, and I believe it was Museum of Modern. They said, hey, we have Museum of Modern here that we'd like to draft. And Bones was sitting in the circle with us like, how do you have Museum of Modern? He's like, oh, no, I've printed it out.
Right.
It's like, he just had no idea that he was right there.
Well, actually, that's like how I met Bones. Is I cloned a cube of his that he didn't own in paper. So he like designed cubes and submitted them to KubeCon, and then if they got accepted, he would build them. Was sort of
That's
something
right.
he said. Like for some cubes, of course, he has some that are very well known and of course like get voted on. But there was one that was up for voting, didn't quite make it. I think it was in this was 2024 again. It was like in the final showdown vote, and it didn't win that vote, but it was called the Labyrinth, and it's like $32 or something, you know. So I just ordered all the cards. I was like, okay, well, like I really want to draft a Desert Cube. I've never drafted one before. I'll order $30 worth of cards. Like that's fine with me. Drafted it, and then I sent him deck photos. I was like, who's the designer for the Labyrinth in the KubeCon Discord? And he's like, it's me. I send him deck photos and he's like, what? Like, I don't even have this cube together in paper. And then, you know, once I designed, no, it was even before I designed Necropolis, but I knew that I wanted to design my own Desert Cube. So I said, Bones, do you want this copy of your cube? And so I brought it to him in Philly last year. And that's how we met in person, was me handing him a copy of his own cube that I had cloned. Yeah. I don't know if he's fired it many times since. I think, you know, he has a glut of of those good Desert Cubes. But it was really funny.
It's a positive glut.
A positive glut, of course. Yeah.
What has drawn you to Desert Cubes, Gabor? Like what has hooked your brain on that?
I think it's really interesting to hear from the people that don't like them. I was talking about this over the weekend with a friend, and he was saying he thinks it's harder to pivot. He doesn't think it's less exciting to him in some ways. And I think the flip side of it was that I had my cube drafted by a really high quality player, like a Pro Tour player in New York who I really respect and is, you know, we're very friendly. And the way that they put it was like, it's so cool to be playing a game and all 40 cards are contextualized by the draft now instead of just 23 or 24 of them. And it's like, I get to play this untapped land on turn 2 because I picked it over this card that would also have been really good in my deck. But if I didn't have this untapped land, like this might be a tap land and I don't get to play my 2-drop. And I think that's just really enticing to me. I do think I'm like a person who drafts a lot of lands on average in most cubes. And so I just think it's so cool to like feel rewarded for having a good land, even more than you do normally. And yeah, I think they are like the place for really evocative designs. Some of my favorite cubes of all time, because they're so evocative and so cool gameplay wise, are Desert Cubes. And, you know, Pulp Nouveau is like that. Ancient Desert, the Wetlands I played recently, so awesome. You know, there's so many. Devoid Cube. I could list them for a really long time, but I just think they like really invite you to like imagine the space that you're playing in a way that's different than a Legacy Cube or a Peasant Cube. Those are just very different design projects.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that a little bit more in depth, perhaps with Ethereum Landscape as a backdrop here.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe as we dive into that a little bit, would you be willing to give us the elevator pitch for the Ethereum Landscape?
Sure. Ethereum Landscape is a very harsh, artifact-centric desert cube focused on the Esper shard and the vibe of Esper from Alara. So a lot of the cards are from Alara and specifically Esper or Mirrodin and New Phyrexia, that era that I was learning the game in, like I said earlier. And it is Esper, but the colorless section is very long, and there are other pips. You know, there will be a red pip on a Scrapwork Mutt or a green pip on a Haywire Mite. But the only like cards that you'll draft where the casting cost is a color pip will be Esper. And then it's very hard to get your pips in this environment. That's the goal, which is inspired by the Gibber Cube by Keldon. I think that that's like a really interesting way to play with a lot of techie utility lands and to challenge the drafters. It's very different from Necropolis, the other desert cube I've designed. I was talking about this in a Discord like a couple months back about some people prefer desert cubes where it's really harsh and some people prefer desert cubes where it's really lush and there's a lot of lands. Necropolis is like 19 and a half lands on average per drafter if you include MDFCs, and Ethereum Landscape is like 16 lands per drafter.
Ooh,
and so it's like
close.
so like there's sort of two ends of the spectrum, and I have both available to whomever wants to do that. Yeah, I'll leave it there. I mean, that's longer than an elevator pitch already.
I appreciate that you noted the Giver Cube as an inspiration, but also when we think about desert cubes, you know, we're referring to a cube that doesn't have land that you can add after the draft, or sometimes it's limited. But in this case, no lanes in the box, you got to draft everything you want. But environments like the Giver or the original Desert cubes were incredibly punishing. Like they were full of these almost undesirable land cards that were, depletion counters or that were very difficult to use. And that sounds like that's kind of the spirit you lean into with this one, where it's not just like Desert for the Desert mechanic, but it's something that actually makes it more challenging to put your deck together in some ways.
Yeah, I don't think I'm as extreme as that or as some of the other designs that I've seen where you play lands that you've never seen before because they would only exist in a desert environment like this. There still are like 5 of each basic or 4 of each basic or something, and like Contaminated Landscape from MH3 is here, and there's a Watery Grave and a Pain Lands and things like that. I think the thing that was really exciting about me hearing about Giver Cube, which I actually still haven't drafted, but a friend who is from Seattle was back there, drafted it, and was just ranting and raving about it, is getting to play like with these little techie colorless lands that ended up being really relevant. 9 times out of 10 it's a waste, and then 1 time out of 10 it's really cool. And I've gotten the feedback that it's really complicated and overwhelming, which I totally understand. Jane, who designed the ball pit, has talked about how like she's tried to simplify the land base there because there's so much going on. But I kind of think that the appeal for me here is which techie land did you get? And did you get your pips? And can you make those two things go together? One of my favorite drafts of this cube was by a local who saw, I think it's Ruins of Oran Reef, and just built his entire deck around Ruins of Oran Reef, took every single modular creature he could find. He had all 3 Arcbound workers, and was just like, I'm going to play cheap creatures, give them counters. He had like 9 1-drops at the end of the draft. And just like, I'm building my entire deck around +1/+1 counters, aggro, and specifically Ruins of Oran Reef. And there's another local who complained to me about having Blast Zone untapped by Deserted Temple to blow him out. And I was like, I hear you that was frustrating because there's a lot going on, but also it sounds like the person who did that just did one of the coolest plays they made all month. So I'm not mad about that, at all. I think that's really cool.
Both of you are writing in your diaries, but for different reasons.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's the appeal here, as well as just like the flavor, the evocative. When I designed it, I was just like picking cards that made me feel really excited. And in the local Discord, I just posted like 20 screenshots of different cards. And I was like, looking at these cards makes me really happy. So that's why I'm playing with them. Like I said, Elish Norn is in here. Just the original Elish Norn art has never left my mind for 13 years and counting, or even longer. And yeah, just like Shieldred, Jin Gataxias, the Mirrors, like Esper Zoa. I just love to look at a foil Esper Zoa every time I see it in the pack. So yeah. And Shroom was like the commander that I was playing for the brief stint that I was playing commander. And I definitely identify as like an Esper player in terms of like, it's just the colors that I end up drafting the most. Although I do think I'm pretty balanced, but Esper, it has like a slight edge. And I just love playing Esper Control, or any of the 3 combinations, Azorius, Dimir, and Orzhov, I love a lot.
I mean, you mentioned casting Sphinx's Revelation in Standard, so you kind of outed yourself there.
Right. Exactly right.
You mentioned receiving some feedback that may be critical in some ways, but like, people suggesting that there's some high complexity or some difficulty in navigating the environment. Like, do you kind of take that feedback and just go, okay, I hear you, but I'm going to stick in this lane? Or is that the sort of thing that you do try to adapt to people who are playing the environment?
Mm-hmm. Of course, I'm trying to adapt. I think, I expect us to talk about later, Cube is about community to me. And so, like, if I'm getting a lot of feedback from a lot of people that the complexity is overwhelming and unfun, then I would certainly change it. But so far, like, I've received just absolutely overwhelming positive feedback, and that people are so... And also, just to be clear, like, this person who was telling me about this story still had positive feedback for the Cube, so I don't want to put him on blast, but I want to bring out the gameplay experience that's exciting and the draft experience that's exciting for my players. But also, at the same time, there's so many cubes here in New York that Ethereum Landscape has not been drafted since it was in Cube for a Cause in August, and it's currently the new year, 2026. So I am not too worried about like constantly tweaking my cube. I know that a lot of people really derive a lot of joy from that, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but for me, it's like, well, this environment is so far from solved and people are having fun looking at these cards in packs and putting together decks that I haven't seen before. So we're just going to keep doing that. Like, I'll make very minor changes. You know, I heard a lot about Steel Hellkite at Cube for a Cause, so I cut that. But until I hear like overwhelming feedback over multiple drafts from multiple drafters that it's too complicated, I think I'm going to stick to what was initially exciting to me about the Cube, which was the complexity of these weird lands.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to imply that that was like a harsh criticism by any means.
No,
I think so much about Cube and inviting people to play a Cube is about setting expectations. And so it can be tough to show how complex an environment is and how many different things there are to think about. So sometimes that is just, I was expecting something lighter and it turned out to be heavier than I thought. And I think that's, we've talked with others as well about how that kind of feedback can be valuable. It's the sort of thing you get to keep filing away, and then when you get a critical mass, you can act on it.
Exactly. And I think maybe the most, besides the Steel Hellkite cut, the other piece of feedback, and which I actually do think is more important than any single card like Steel Hellkite, was just like, hey, maybe include a helper card that when people sit down at the draft, they get like a quick overview of what's going on here and what they signed up for. And then nobody's going to be surprised and upset that they have to draft their lands,
Yeah.
I did get the feedback that some people ended up with like pretty non-functioning decks because they just did not have enough lands because it's so harsh. And so I'm like, okay, that's really helpful. It's like, I do want that to be the experience, but I do want people to know that that's what they're getting into when they draft the Cube. So yeah, I'm working on making that card, and I haven't needed to rush into it because this Cube hasn't been drafted, like I said. And that's not a complaint. I'm glad that we have so many cubes to draft. Yeah.
A good glut, as we might say.
Exactly.
I did want to ask, kind of specifically on this environment, Esper tends to favor artifacts quite a lot as a theme. You mentioned Shroom as one of the centerpieces there. How do you engage with disenchant effects or removal that cares about artifacts in such an artifact-heavy space?
It was interesting just thinking about the whole removal suite. I mean, of course, black and white have the best hard removal in Magic historically, and then blue has the best stack interaction, or the only stack interaction, barring like a few exceptions and like color pipe breaks. And so disenchants are ones that you really have to work for, is my goal. I do think that Citizen's Crowbar is like really, really strong here, and I'm totally fine with that. It's like you'd have to find a way to like recur it somehow. You have to have 2 white pips over 2 turns, like there's like, unless the creature has haste, which I'm looking at the cube right now. I can't think of anything. Maybe you like have some way to give it haste, and if you're just using that to like activate Citizen's Crowbar at sorcery speed because you had to cast Citizen's Crowbar, I mean, like that, I'm fine with that, But then otherwise, the only 2 disenchant effects are in green, which it's very hard to get. You would have to filter it through a rainbow land or have like exactly Karplusan Forest or Tree of Tales to do that. And so that I think is really interesting, to have some of these off-color non-Esper pips that give you like a huge benefit. Like Phyrexian Dragon Engine is another case. Like 2 red pips, that's really, really hard. But that card is really good if you get to bring it back. And if you can bring it back in a different way, then even better. Then you get to have all the benefit with none of the difficulty of the mana.
Yeah, same with like Simian Simulacrum on the green side.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you noted that the mana base was restrictive in a way, that you want your colored pips to feel special when you can get them. Mm-hmm. But I noted you also have the artifact lands. Is that a little spooky with some ways to destroy those running around?
Yeah, it is. But I think it's like, if you're getting Haywire Mighted on Ancient Den, like so many things had to go right that I'm fine with that 1 in 100 chance or whatever. I think that also you can't have like a Esper / Mirrodin cube, where that's the vibe, and not have these lands. They're just too evocative. These are more Magic illustrations that have stuck in my mind ever since I was a teenager.
Yeah, that's one of those, I've wrestled with that in some of my own projects. I would love to include these lands, but I also know that any disenchant effect becomes a Stone Rain.
Right. Yeah, I mean, 3 cards out of 384 to hit. There's only 9 total artifact lands. These are just odds where I'm like, if it happens, it's actually kind of an interesting story, I think. Like, this is not the kind of environment where Stone Raining is going to happen every draft. It's going to happen once every multiple drafts, and then that's an interesting story. Imagine if the player like comes back from getting Stone Rained and wins the game. Like, that would be awesome, and I'm sure that they would talk about it a lot and be excited about that. And on the other side, it's like, I drafted this green land that otherwise doesn't make like mana that's useful for my deck just so that I could haywire their land, and it ended up working out. I think that those are prices I'm willing to pay.
No, I'm into it. That's great. Well, Gabor, kind of thinking of artifacts, one of the ways that we really got connected early on was through one of your 5 Alives that was artifact flavored, or at least broadly had some artifact interaction in it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about 5 Alive and how you got connected to that branch of the game?
Well, yeah. So, I mean, we were dancing around this story earlier, but the project I wanted to show you at KubeCon was this 5 Alive, this blue 5 Alive project that I put together. And it existed because I listened to DSP's episode of Recross the Paths very early on. And I mean, like I also said earlier, that was the first design project I actually took on, was this 32 card 5 Alive. Before Necropolis, before anything else, it was like I was just cloning cubes, but 32 cards felt very doable. I also wasn't designing big cubes because I didn't have bulk. I wasn't playing limited. I'd given away all my cards from when I was younger. What a lot of people say is like, oh, well, when I say a lot of people, I specifically mean the Lucky Paper Radio guys.
When a lot of hosts of the Lucky Paper Radio shows say.
Yes, yeah, exactly. They're like, we'll just build it out of all your commander decks and your limited cards. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't really have those. So I'm not going to build a cube out of cards that I don't have, obviously. Or I will eventually, but not right now. So yeah, 32 cards felt very doable. And I think I got like a prize pack because the game store we went to had like a little promo pack. And I opened Azure Beastbinder. And I was like, this would be really cool in a 5 Alive. And I would love to play a 5 Alive that's blue based. I had cloned DSB's mostly black one. I think it's called Swamp Song, and thought it was really cool. And built this blue one before KubeCon and brought it along to just play with friends in between rounds and also to show people and see what they thought. And yeah, that was how I heard about it, how I designed it, and then how you got to playing it that one time at KubeCon.
Just in case folks haven't listened to that episode in the past, 5 Alive typically refers to a small format where each player starts with usually 5 life, and the draft has some variety, but often involves building your opening hand out of the shared pool of cards, then becomes a shared library and a shared graveyard. There's a lot of variation. It's kind of funny, like trying to describe this as like, accept all these different things that each one does, you know?
Right.
But there's something kind of magical about the pocket size of a project like this. Like yours is, you said 32 or 36 these days?
32 divides perfectly by 8, so that is probably right, yeah.
I know some people have explored up to 40 or so, but you know, just playing in that small space, I think it was something that was really remarkable. You know, for me, of course, a special experience for you to just say, hey, do you have a quick second to try this? And like we got to sit down and play 2 games in, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. That there's something really powerful about having an experience that's so bite-sized like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what DSB was. That's how he was pitching it on the episode, and that's exactly what I wanted. I knew that if I show up at Cube Night, there's going to be a cool cube. I don't need to, at that time, I did not want to like design a whole thing. I wanted to just try more things, try more cubes, but I was excited to like bring something to play in between rounds to start getting my feet wet with design. And yeah, I mean, not to like jump too far ahead, but you then showed me like almost a year later, like a 5 Alive that was inspired by the one that I showed you. And then at the same time, another friend of mine had just shown me a different 5 Alive that she put together because I had shown her this 5 Alive. And so I think it's like this cool, like branching full circle moment of like people experimenting in this related, but still quite different sandbox of 5 Alive. It's like adjacent to Cube, but such a different gameplay experience that people can go in so many different ways. It's so unexplored.
Well, and there's something that is, I think, easier, maybe the wrong word, but it's like more accessible to copy those ideas or to borrow from those ideas to say, hey, I liked this play pattern, or man, this card really sparked joy for me in a way that I wanted to replicate. So then like to look at a list of 32 cards, like you can find most of those, or, you know, even if it's like, I only liked these 3, well, great. Then you only have to find 29 more. You know?
Yeah, it's already a whole 10th of the cube. Easy.
But yeah, then like seeing some of my friends have picked up from it when I bring it to work and, you know, or play over lunch breaks or whatever, that then they want to try to build these small things too. And it's like a safer, easier way to jump into that.
Yeah, definitely. I was chatting with Greg, the person who hosts the Vertex series of events, about the non-Magic games we play, and he plays board games with a group of people that for the most part really want to play games even more complicated than Magic. And
yeah.
I do not play with my non-Magic friends. I do not play games like that. The games that really get to the table that aren't Magic are small box card games, and they are bite size. You shuffle up, you play like 8 games in a night. And that's the appeal, is like there's many different winners, there's many different strategies you can try. I literally on my desk am looking at Scout, the Crew, and Yokai Septet, which are all, I could fit all of them in a tiny little bag and carry them with me everywhere. And so I think that's part of why like it was so exciting, is it feels easy to ask somebody to sit down and play something for 5 minutes with me. And it feels easier for me as a designer to build something, get it together, get it played, and then see how I feel about it and make changes. And if you make 3 changes to a 5 Alive list, that's 10% of the cube, like we just said. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a completely different environment if you change out Azure Beastbinder for Shoreline Looter or something like that. So it was the perfect place for me to start with designing, for sure.
One of the other things you did that I wanted to highlight is that we found it kind of difficult to categorize these because different people were trying to put these together in different ways with slightly different rules or slightly different lists. And you said about helping catalog some of the extant 5 Alives, at least in the vein that we're most familiar with. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, there's a not very active, but consistent 5 Alive group in the Cube Talk Discord. I appreciate that it, of course, I also appreciate the threads that have posts in them every single day. And I also don't read all of those posts every day. I appreciate that 5 Alive, it's like 3 months will go by and somebody will be like, I got to finally play this again, and here are my thoughts. And then everybody comes out from the woodwork and is like, oh, cool. Like, did you try, like, what about this and that? And so, yeah, I think somebody said, oh, like, it'd be great to just have all these lists somewhere because they're sort of scattered. And honestly, Cube Cobra isn't even necessarily the best place for them because they're so small that they don't even show up on the Cube map. They don't have enough cards in them. And so I'm really like the kind of person who says, oh, there's a task, like, I'm going to just do it now. I'm not a procrastinator. Traditionally, I just, like, want things to get done. So I was like, okay, like, that's easy. Everybody posts your lists here, whether it's a photo or a Cube Cobra link, and I'll just put them all into Moxfield, and we'll have them all there. I don't use Moxfield, so they can just be the only public lists I have on that account, and then anybody can view them by going to my profile. And yeah, it all happened in 24 hours and probably took me 4 hours worth of work. So that's the kind of thing that I just am happy to do so that we all can take a look and have access to it for the future.
Yeah, and I wanted to highlight that in part because I'm grateful for your work on that, as a way to link that community to it. But also if people are curious or looking for that same kind of inspiration, like, you don't know where to start, here are, several lists that have found their way to the table or have bounced around a group for feedback that hopefully will get some gears turning.
Yeah, for sure. This is the kind of like side story that maybe gets cut for time, but one of my favorite 5 Alive stories is that the friend who I showed it to and built a 5 Alive other than you is Jessie Robkin, who is a very good player and was playing at an RC, playing Breach, which is the deck that she's famous for. And she realized while she was in, I can't remember which RC she won, but she was there and she realized over the weekend that actually Brain Surge is better than Stock Up in her list. And she's like, how am I going to find a Brain Surge this weekend? And she was like, I have a Brain Surge. It's in my 5 Alive list. And so the Brain Surge that she won the RC with was only in her bag because I had shown her 5 Alive. I'm sure she would have gotten another copy, but I do think that that's a very cool story.
That's amazing. Cube enriches our lives in so many ways.
Exactly. It enriches even the constructed players' lives. Finds a way.
Well, Gabor, I appreciate that you mentioned that you talk about when you see something that needs to be done, you're the kind to just jump in and do it. Something that you've engaged with in the Cube space as well is that you're involved in, you mentioned doing some organizing on behalf of a labor union. Talk a little bit about that and how that intersects with your gaming experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that really changed in my life between stopping and starting playing Magic again was becoming like very politically active and very political as a person. Yeah, anybody who's met me at a Cube event will know that I'm political, I think, even if all we've done is play Magic together. I also just think that our lives are inherently political. There's no way to exist in our world without being political. And so I, of course, have made my my hobbies political too. I had a friend who, this was the friend that I realized knew how to play Magic already having known him for a year, just after I started getting back into the game and I invited over to drafts. We had been organizing together completely unrelated to Magic, doing housing related work in Brooklyn's Chinatown. And he said, hey, like in the New York City DSA Discord, somebody just posted that there's like a Union Magic night and there's going to be a cube there. Do you want to go? And I was like, yeah, awesome. Unions, cube. It's free. There's no table fee. You know, table fees are a big part of New York City Magic because real estate's so expensive here. So I show up and it's for this union, which at the time had just won their election, but had not yet even begun bargaining their contract. It was held at the union's like office, and the series of businesses is 5 brick and mortar stores in New York City, all owned by 2 people. The Uncommons and Brooklyn Strategist are both really long-standing New York City game institutions, and then the 2 owners came together, I think with a third person who no longer is in the picture business-wise, to form Hex & Company, which has 3 other locations in the city. So 5 locations, 2 owners, 100 employees that are not getting treated well. And yeah, when I signed in, there was a little like box to say, do you want to get involved with helping organize customers for these stores? And I said yes, like I said, and like you alluded to, I'm the kind of person who says yes to doing things, to making change.
Here's a need.
Yeah, and here's a way to do a thing that is actually directly engaged with the community that I exist in, which I think is a really important part of organizing and politics, is that politics, of course, does happen in Washington, D.C., but the way that you and I and other people like actually enact change is in our communities. And so, yeah, I got involved, and, these were cubers. That's why they had cube at the event. It was mostly other customers. It was not actually people in the union, but we were all like part of this solidarity committee that was organizing other customers, because I think all Magic players will clearly understand that a game store, of course, benefits from the purchases made by a person who wants to buy their, son a board game for Christmas, but really the legs for the business comes from the TCG players who show up every week, maybe twice a week, and are willing to pay for singles, for packs, and for table space, and for the events that happen there and stuff like that. So we needed to reach this community in order to wield the power to actually pressure the bosses. If the bosses thought that there was no way that the union organizing was going to threaten their bottom line, they realistically are not going to give the workers what they want. I wish that we lived in a world where people were just nice, but effective organizing involves wielding power and assessing where you can find that power. And in this case, it really was by tapping into a pretty left-leaning, young Magic playing community across these 5 stores and telling them that when the union calls for a strike, or the union tells them that we're going to walk out today, that they'll actually show up and they won't cross the picket line, and they'll demand that the owners do better. So yeah, I was organizing on that for maybe 14 to 16 months before we won our contract in early to mid 2025. And yeah, it was just one of the most rewarding organizing experiences I've ever had, and also one of the most rewarding gameplay experiences I ever had, because the group that I was cubing with ahead of Cube for a Cause was basically just only people from this solidarity committee, and it was the only reason we played Magic together. We did not play the same formats. People just didn't even play Constructed. It was just a bunch of limited grinders and cube players. So yeah, that's why I was firing 8 pods in New York before Cube for a Cause.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty significant commitment of time and energy, on the front end. It's not just I'll check a box and I'll show up to an event or something. Mm-hmm. You said that's over a year of time and active thought to make that happen.
Right. Yeah, that looks like weekly meetings. It looks like tasks after each of those meetings. It looks like text banking and phone banking. And I just really am a strong believer in doing the thing. And I admit to frustration with people who bemoan our current political situation and also don't do anything about it, and insist that because somebody else voted incorrectly, that's what's ruining politics in our country or in our world. And I really just think that if everyone gave an extra hour every week to trying to change their community and making it a better place, that a lot more would get done. And people would be housed, people would be fed, people would be happier in the places that they're living, and they would know their rights. And yeah, I live in a very progressive city, and still there's a huge housing crisis here, and homelessness crisis. It's cold, and the new city government maybe is going to do more, but the old city government was not doing enough. And I really am just sick and tired of being told that the only way that you can enact change is by going to vote. And I just fundamentally don't believe that that's true.
Is this something that you discovered like through your gaming community, or is that something that like you were experiencing beforehand and it just came in as a natural connection in the gaming sphere?
It was a natural connection. I really became politicized in like late high school or early undergrad. These were people that I like played games with. I think that games is like always a way to connect with people, and people who organize together need to find ways to also have fun together. Otherwise you're just going to get really burnt out. But yeah, it was like politics first and games second. And then, yeah, like I said, I got invited to this game night through an organizing friend. And then a lot of these people are organizing friends who became also game friends and cube friends. And I had heard about Ryan Over Turf and the 180 card cubes, but little did I know, joining this solidarity committee, there were like 2 people who had gone to like every year of CubeCon and were not necessarily like well known in the community, but knew of like everything and like plugged me in really quickly. So yeah, it's all interconnected. Like there's no way to disentangle. I guess like in my mind, like organizing and games or hobbies are like always things you end up having to do outside of work, except for like a vanishingly small number of people who get to do one or the other for work. And for most people, because it's only the things you choose to spend your time outside of work doing, they're always like in dialogue. Am I going to go and play games, or am I going to show up to this rally? Am I going to go and play games, or am I going to send all these texts because we have a picket line tomorrow? Things like that.
One of the projects you worked on with that was, I believe you helped coordinate a stream of the 100 Ornithopters Cube to benefit the Tabletop Workers Union, right?
Yeah, that's right. Jesse Robkin and Aspiring Spike were the faces of our event. But yeah, I don't think anybody would argue that me and my current roommate, Richie, put in more work than anybody else on that event. There were many late nights figuring out streaming, figuring out messaging, working with union members to do interviews. I'm really, really proud of that project. I think that if the listener hasn't seen it, you should really go find the VOD. The gameplay, 100 Ornithopters is so cool to watch played by high-level players. And also we put a lot of work into the interviews with the union members to sort of get the message out about why we're doing this. And that was really like the final push before we won the contract. I mean, the contract was won in maybe March, April, or May, and that stream happened in January, exactly a year ago, pretty much, like in January of 2025.
And this looks a little bit different than some other charity type events or some other mobilization type events, where this isn't just like people play the event and then proceeds go to some fund. Like this was like an activity right, to specifically call to action or to raise specific awareness about this issue.
Yeah, the money, it was fundraising for a strike relief fund because the workers needed to have a credible strike threat to say like, hey, if we go on strike, we're going to have the money to do this for like 3 weeks and still get 100% of our pay. The union that they organized with had the funds to cover like 70% pay for all the workers if they went on strike, but not 100%. And so like all the money raised was sort of to say like, yeah, actually, like these workers aren't even going to lose any cash out of their pockets to go on strike and make their workplaces better for them by raising money over GoFundMes that had many different sources, but really like a huge amount of it came from the stream. And yeah, it was all just like volunteer labor. I was unemployed, like I have mentioned previously, and Richie and I, were doing this basically as a full-time job for like a month in order to make it happen. And yeah, I have to also like shout out so many other people helped. I can't list all their names, but multiple people from the Solidarity Committee, people from outside of that. Andy, of course, was gracious enough to bring his cube all the way up to New York to be drafted. And without any one of those people, it probably wouldn't have happened. Also union members, even more exciting to have like union members who are super excited to get in on filming and helping out with making it all happen. So it's always a team effort, and we still have the Discord, and I still look back fondly on some of those message threads and the frantic coordinating to make it all happen in the end.
Yeah, I mean, certainly any project of that magnitude takes a lot of hands, but every hand makes a difference there. Well, usually as we come to the end of a conversation, I like to ask, what advice would you want to offer to other designers? But I feel like it should probably be broader than that, to say, Gabor, what would you hope that people take away from a conversation like this?
Yeah, of course, we talked a lot about Cube, and I have so many thoughts on Cube, but I think that the rest of your, amazing cast of guests have that covered for me. I'd say, think really long and hard about what you're doing to make the lives better for your neighbors and for the people that you interact with on a weekly basis, and if there's ways to do more for them and help them. And with the way the world is right now, there's certainly somebody in your neighborhood or in your city who needs help, and there's definitely a way that you can help them, whether it is, mutual aid through cash or volunteering your time and energy towards supporting a union or any other cause. Yeah, I think that people laud Cube so much for the way that it brings communities together. And of course, that involves like supporting the people in those communities. But there's like a lot more that goes towards like that happening, like game store staff and the people that they're in community with, or the people in your neighborhood that you walk past on the way to your game store or drive past on the way to the game store. I think that Cube and community are inextricably linked, and then community and organizing are inextricably linked. So I just hope that people aren't losing hope in a moment that's really bleak and are ready to fight for a world that's worth living in.
That's great. Well, Gabor, I'd be remiss if I didn't close up our conversation by asking one of my favorite questions here, which is more magic related, I suppose, than the other.
Definitely.
If you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick? And who would you have do the illustration?
Of course, I've been thinking about this question since the very first Recross the Paths episode I heard, which was the very first Recross the Paths episode ever published with Greg. I have many Magic cards that I love and illustrations that I love. I think that for many of them, I love them so much because I would never change them. I have a surgical extraction tattoo, and I love the illustration. So I think I'll pick just a card whose illustration I like but don't love, and that I mechanically really love, which is Nahiri's Wrath. 2 in a red, sorcery, just like does crazy madness stuff. It's like really funky to read, just so cool and so evocative. And I think I'd pick like a non-magic illustrator to do it. 2 of my favorite manga illustrators, Takahiko Inoue, who did Vagabond and Slam Dunk, is probably my favorite manga illustrator of all time, and Kyu Hayashida. They're both just so phenomenal. I would be happy with either of them. They both have done like some fantasy illustrations, but I love like fine line pencil or pen and ink, paper and ink, just like classic drawings that old school manga have. And so anything like that for Nahiri's Wrath, I think would be very special.
Yeah, Nahiri's Wrath, one of those cards. I remember trying to draft it and make it work in the set. It was very difficult. So you had to discard cards to do damage to each creature, I believe. Or
right. It's like it deals damage equal to the total mana value of cards discarded, but across X targets where X is the number of cards. It's like a very strange card, but just so... It's really like asking you to jump through so many hoops to do something super sick. And so I love it for that. I had it cast against me in Pulp Nouveau, and that was the first time it ever was cast against me. It didn't do very well in that game, but I was like, this is maybe the coolest card gameplay-wise I've ever seen, and I need to design an environment where it's good enough. And I think I have, so yeah.
No, it's so good. Well, and you noted your artist in the manga space. I recently watched Slam Dunk just got an anime adaptation.
Mm-hmm. It got a movie, I think, yeah.
Yeah. So it's like just getting kind of a sense of that style, and then getting a sense of what the original line work looked like was really cool. And it's a really neat style.
Yeah. I think Vagabond is just so clean. There's so much motion in these still drawings, and yeah, it's my favorite manga of all time. And then Kyu Hayashida is like very grungy, very dirty, like maximalist, and I definitely identify visually as like a maximalist or enjoying things that trend towards maximalism in their like detail. So yeah, both of them are my favorites. I couldn't pick between the two of them.
How could you?
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Gabor, this has been a delight. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to do this. As I mentioned up top, it's been really special to me to get to connect with you in the way that we did early on, and that we still get to share friendship over something like Cube. It's been really a treat for me. If folks want to follow up on some of your projects, I know I'll have a couple links in the show notes below, but if people want to learn more, where should we point them?
Yeah, I'm on Cube Cobra as AHNKILI, and I'm also on Discord there, so you can probably find me in Cube Talk or many different like East Coast Cube Discords. I'm always open to chat about Cube or about organizing, so anybody can DM me on Discord there. I don't have any social media, so don't try and find me. Maybe, or I guess I do, but I'm not active, so you can find me, but it won't do you much good. And then, yeah, in my Cube Cobra profile, I have a link to the article I wrote for the Upkeep magazine about Cube and organizing, which I would appreciate people giving a read as well.
It's a great read, and your voice really comes through, and your passion for it is very clear there. It's a great piece.
Thanks.
Well, Gabor, thank you so much again. Here's hoping that it's not too long before we get to sit down across from each other at a table. Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. This was a pleasure.